please join me in welcoming Rabbi Peter Berg to the podium to introduce Senator Warnock.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to introduce our distinguished speaker today, and also pleased that this is the first time all week I have not been asked to give the invocation. I have known our speaker for many years. We both arrived in Atlanta at about the same time to lead two historic pulpits in the city, Ebenezer Baptist Church and the Temple. You may have noticed in recent weeks that our guest also has another job that he took on. And I really just came here today to let you all know that I have another job too. I now field about 75 phone calls a week for people trying to get access to the senator. So today I thought I'd cut out the middleman. His cell phone is 404. What a blessing to introduce my friend, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock. As a nation, we are yearning for genuine leadership, for men and women like our senator of inspiration and insight, for visionaries who build up God's image of our state and of our nation. Reverend Warnock is a wonderful combination of superb teacher, outstanding intellect, compassionate soul, and visionary leader. He has been an ever-present source of strength for me personally and for our entire community. He is a beacon of justice. He has the courage to break down walls that inhibit the truth, a genuine loving concern for all of God's children. Dr. Warnock has clarity on the most important issues of the day. He asks penetrating questions to get to the heart of the issue. He models effective communication by working actively for social change, by doing what is right, not what is trendy. And a truly wonderful aspect of the senator, as productive as he is as a teacher, an author, he just wrote a new children's book just recently, as one of America's great preachers, he is such a caring father with the cutest kids in the state of Georgia. One of whom told me recently, I think, that he gets to go to Disney because of his busy schedule. He is a steward of justice, unafraid to face the challenges of our day, from reducing gun violence, ending mass incarceration, providing health care for all, ensuring universal preschool education, ending anti-Semitism and bigotry, eliminating the inequities and racial injustices in our society, to name just a few. When I think of him, I think of the third sage, Rabbi Hillel ben Gamliel, who once said, "In a place where no one is human, one should strive to be human." Reverend Warnock, you have brought humanity to Ebenezer Baptist, humanity to the city of Atlanta, and moral courage to Washington, D.C. While Reverend Warnock's work and activism have been local, his vision is truly global. During this time of our national distress and international conflict, he stands tall at the rock at Ebenezer, and he preaches that God will once again deliver the world through threats to voting rights, unjust conditions that continue the cycle of poverty. And after he finishes, he gets up with his own hands and with his own feet, and he does the work. Because he truly understands that our mission is to transform the world from the way it is to the way the world needs to be. He continues to draw on the challenges set forth by Dr. King, and in his short term as a senator, he has moved our state and country forward, introducing legislation to honor Senator Isaacson, raising the minimum wage, securing military interests in Savannah, naming a post office for Congressman Lewis, co-sponsoring a bill on maternal health with Senator Rubio, providing emergency relief to farmers, supporting federal voting rights reform, and co-sponsoring a bill to advance the Abraham Accords with Israel. He has been a champion of working across both sides of the aisle to get the work of the people done. Senator Warnock, thank you for leading us in this time when neighbors can embrace again, when communities can thrive, a time of liberty and equality for all of God's children. You are a blessing, and your friendship is one of the great treasures of my lifetime. With your leadership and under the guidance of God, The light of wisdom will shine brightly evermore. Rotary Club of Atlanta, please welcome Ebenezer Baptist Church's senior pastor, Georgia's junior senator, and my brother from another mother, Raphael Warnock.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Well, hello, everybody. Please be seated. Thank you so very much. I am so grateful for those wonderful words from my dear friend and brother, Peter Berg, Rabbi Peter Berg. And I rise today only to say that everything he said is true. Are there any questions? Rabbi Berg is a wonderful friend and an amazing leader in his own right. I'm so grateful for our friendship, and it's wonderful to see so many friends in this room. Thank you so very much for inviting me back to the Atlanta Rotary Club. I'm grateful for the friendship between our two congregations, stretching really past Rabbi Berg and myself to our immediate predecessors, Rabbi Alvin Sugarman and Joseph Roberts, and prior to that, going all the way back to the temple burning at such a difficult time in our nation's history. I'm also grateful to be here with my dear friend Stephanie Blank. We have worked together for more than a decade. I served on one of the many things that Stephanie has led. She is a born leader, and I'm grateful that she's now serving the Rotary Club, but we worked together with GEARS, Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students. See, I still remember the acronym, where we focus on the development of young children between the ages of 0 and 4, and the importance of that work. I love to come to groups like this as a person who still feels like I represent and try to represent the work of GEARS, to say to sophisticated gatherings like this that I have terrible news for you. As smart as you are, you'll never be as smart as you were when you were 4 years old. But thank you so very much. It's wonderful to be here. When I was here in August of 2021, I had only been elected a few months. And I spoke to you about the difficult times that we were in. The Delta variant of COVID-19 was on the rise, and families were struggling to keep up with costs that kept rising. And our democracy still teetered, and you could say that it still does, somewhere between the hope and promise of what we did here in Georgia on January 5th. And I do mean that in the broadest terms, regardless of your party, regardless of whether you voted for me or not. The fact that Georgia sent its first African-American senator and its first Jewish senator to the United States Senate in one fell swoop says something about the progress we've made and the light that we represent. But here we are, there we were then, the last time I came, and here we are, still teetering somewhere between the promise of January 5th and the meaning of January 6th, the most violent assault on our nation's capital since the War of 1812. A lot has happened since I was last here. Federal investments have begun flowing to Georgia from an infrastructure bill that I'm so very proud that we passed, and we passed it on a bipartisan basis. That infrastructure bill right now is sending millions of dollars across our state to improve and upgrade our ports and our transit systems, creating good jobs, improving our roads and our highways. I even did an amendment in that bipartisan infrastructure bill with Ted Cruz. There's something called the Warnock Cruz Amendment. Yes, that's a thing. Ted Cruz and I are both on the Commerce Committee. I'll be honest, we don't agree on much. And sometimes when he's talking, I'm thinking to myself, really? But as it turns out, one day there was something he wanted to get done that I also wanted to get done. We couldn't get it done in committee, so we had to take it to the floor of the Senate. On the night we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and he stood up on his side of the aisle and began to argue about why he thought we should do this thing. I then stood up on my side of the aisle to argue about why I thought we should do it, and I closed with words I didn't imagine hearing myself say even the last time I was here. In closing, Mr. President, I'd like to associate myself with the words of Senator Cruz. But he and I were trying to get I-14 built out. I-14, which stretches through Texas, would also stretch through Georgia, connecting a lot of our military bases. And it was important to get that road, to get us one step closer to getting that done, because if we get the road built out, nobody ever asks when it's time to get on the highway, are you a Democrat or a Republican? That road goes through blue and red communities, through what Parliament, an old group called vanilla suburbs and chocolate cities. I'm dating myself. Everybody can get on that road and they can get to where they need to go. We created new jobs and we created laws that boosted manufacturing in our country. I'm glad we passed what's known as the Jobs and Competition Bill. Before that, it was known as USICA. The name changed so much, some of my colleagues started calling it now USICA, now you don't. But that bill, which focuses on domestic manufacturing, improving or increasing the manufacturing of chips here in our country. Here in our country in the 1990s and for much of the history of chips, we led the way. Now we make such a small percentage of the nation's chips, which are in everything from cars to computers to cell phones. We focused on lowering the cost of high prescription drugs, and we took major steps to address climate change. We also helped pave the way for Georgia to land the largest economic development deal in the state's history through Hyundai's investment in Bryan County, right near my hometown of Savannah. We've achieved a lot, and I almost forgot we did something else. Georgia reelected me to serve a full 6-year term in the Senate. Seriously, I am deeply honored. It's an amazing thing for the people of your state to say that when we take stock of our lives, when we look into the eyes of our children, when we think about what we want for them and the future we want them to have, as we try to take care of our parents as they are dealing with the blessings and the burdens of aging, for the people of your state to say, since we can't all go, we're going to send you to Washington. And we trust you to represent our best interests, to do what's right, even when it costs. For me, that is the high honor of my life. It is a covenant that I take very seriously, and I work very hard every single day to live up to that. And as the new Congress begins, know that I'm focused on building what Dr. King called the beloved community, where everybody is embraced no matter who they are, what they have, or where they come from. To me, that means using all the tools in my toolbox as both a lawmaker and as a pastor to do the work that Georgians sent me to the Senate to do. During my speech on election night, I promised the people of Georgia that I will walk with you even as I work for you. You can't serve the people unless you can see the people. And you can't see the people unless you spend time among the people. It's something I've learned as a pastor, and I've tried to take that spirit with me to the work of the Senate, because the truth is we can't wave a wand and solve all of our problems. The issues are complicated. But what is important in the meantime is that we work together and that we walk together. And so I'm committed to representing all Georgians, standing up for the principles that matter to Georgians and Americans, while at the same time looking for ways to bring people together, to find common ground, to solve the challenges facing our communities, even in a divided government. And maybe it is because I'm a pastor. Maybe because I'm rated as the 18th most bipartisan senator in the United States Senate, that I remain hopeful about the work that we can get done together. I'm proud of that rating because last Congress, out of 100 senators, I was 100, as junior as you could get, and yet rated 18th among all the senators on my bipartisan work. That means that even while facing an election that was imminent, enough Republicans believed that they could trust me to work on the things that we could agree together, to work with me on enough legislation to get me listed as number 18 with a 6-year term now. I'm very hopeful about what we can get done. Here's what I believe. I believe that when we center people in our policy making, rather than short-term political interests, it is possible to find ways to work with people with whom you disagree most of the time. And when we do that, when we center people in our policy making, we have a better chance of getting the policy right. For instance, I'm a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. I lobbied to be on that committee because I know how important agriculture is to Georgia. And I'm looking forward this year to helping to write the Farm Bill as we do every 5 years. I'm looking forward to opportunities to do that work on a bipartisan basis. I'm focused on protecting vital nutrition benefits and pushing other policies that help both Georgia's farmers and Georgia's families. And I'm hopeful that there is an appetite to get these priorities done. Healthcare is another issue that I'm excited about, and I've been working on it long before I came to the United States Senate. And I have to be very clear, I won't stop pushing. I won't stop pushing to close Georgia's considerable healthcare coverage gap. Georgia needs to expand Medicaid and get 600,000 working class Georgians out of the healthcare coverage gap. Not only is that a problem for their healthcare, it is a problem for the health of our economy. Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. We remain one of only 12 states still dragging in our heels, and I think it's a drag on our economy, not to mention that people are literally dying for lack of health care. Meanwhile, I continue to work on other health care issues. I was very proud to lead the effort to cap the cost of insulin for folks who are on Medicare. Insulin is a drug that's been around 100 years. It should not be expensive. When the patent was sold, it was sold for $1. Insulin is expensive because of the shenanigans that happened in Washington. The good news is that 20 states have already capped the cost of insulin. And many of them are red states. States like Alabama, states like Nebraska have already capped the cost of insulin. And when I was working on my insulin bill, I actually had a Republican co-sponsor who had expressed a deep interest in working with me on this. But as we were working on it, it got closer and closer to the election. And all of a sudden, he went radio silent on me, and we were going into the Senate chamber one day. I said, "Hey, buddy, I thought we were going to work on this bill." And he sort of winked at me and said, "I'll see you after the election, friend." I'm not upset with him about that. So after I won, I tracked back to him. And I said, let's work together on capping the cost of insulin. We got it done for folks on Medicare. It shouldn't be expensive for anybody. As a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, I'm excited to work this year on updating the legislation that governs air travel in our country, especially after recent disruptions we've seen. I see lots of potential for bipartisan cooperation to make sure that legislation works for important economic engines like Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport and important Georgia companies like Delta. And just like we've worked at the federal level to spur job growth at companies like Q-Cells in Dalton and incentivize economic opportunities like the new Hyundai facility in coastal Georgia, I'm going to keep looking for ways to bring good-paying jobs to our state. I'm also going to keep working to direct investments to our state to make sure our workforce is actually ready for these jobs and for the jobs of the future. Here's the deal, even in a hyper-partisan Washington, I still think that it's possible for lawmakers in both parties and on both sides of the Capitol to work together and accomplish good things for Georgia. At the same time, I want to be very clear that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. You elected a pastor who serves in the Senate. And so when it comes to solving the problems of our communities, I seek to think about them through a moral lens. I think there's no shortage of transactional politicians in Washington, D.C. I was privileged to serve as John Lewis's pastor. And after spending 2 years in Washington, I can say that if John Lewis was the conscience of the Congress on the House side, if the Congress needed a conscience, the Senate needs a soul. Rabbi Berg said, in a place where nobody is human, strive to be human. I'm trying every single day, my friend. And that's why, as a strong supporter of all of these opportunities for job creation, for industry, I know that at the same time we have to speak to the soul of our country. We have to transform the culture of bias and brutality that would allow 5 police officers to brutally beat a man to death. And we have to create a culture where all are safe. I refuse to accept the notion that brutality is the cost for public safety, and that we have to choose either justice or public safety. The truth is, we can have justice and public safety. In fact, the only way to have public safety is to have justice, and the only way to have justice is to have public safety, and we ought to remain committed to both. That's the work we must do, and we must do it here in Georgia, because there is still work here to do on that front. Finally, and nobody believes a preacher when he says finally, know that I remain focused on working on voting rights. And I know that some people wonder, well, what does he mean? Everybody has a right to vote. Well, we had a right to vote when the 15th Amendment was passed. A right doesn't mean anything if you don't have access, or if that access is limited in some way. And so there is still work that needs to be done on that front. And while it is true that I was elected, it's not true that just because people overcome barriers, that there aren't barriers in the first place. We had to file a lawsuit so that the people of Georgia could vote on that first Saturday in the runoff election. And there were those who said, that's just the letter of the law. Sorry, you just can't vote on that Saturday. Wish we could do something about it. It's just the law. That's what they said. And I filed a lawsuit since they said their hands were tied, and we freed their hands. And then they appealed. Think about that. And we won, and then they appealed again, asking for emergency relief. Let's have the big, noisy arguments that you have in a democracy. That's what makes our country great. And then let's just make sure that every eligible citizen in Georgia and in America can exercise their constitutional right to vote. As I close again, Dr. King is right. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can't help it. I still believe we're all in this together. I do. We're all we've got. And so I look forward to coming back to have conversation with Rotarians time and time again. We've got important work to do. Let's build a future that embraces all of our children. God bless each of you. Thank you so much.
All right, I've been looking at these questions. One of the number one questions from lots of folks, and I love how this first one was phrased, is bipartisanship a pipe dream? And you mentioned the important need for that, right? But you also mentioned the importance of being amongst your constituents. And one of the things that I've heard is that a lot of the folks who are elected no longer live in Washington together. Their kids don't go to school together, they're not meeting on the soccer fields or the baseball fields, so they don't really know each other. What are you doing to know the folks on the other side of the aisle? And then some folks wanted to know, what can we as citizens here do to help combat this as well?
No, thank you so much for the question. I'm not sure about that.
There's a little switch on the bottom.
All right, can you hear me now? All right, there it is. So, no, it's an excellent question. And it speaks to the health of the covenant that we have with one another, e pluribus unum. Out of many, one. And it's something that I believe in deeply. No, bipartisanship is not a pipe dream. And I mentioned the amendment that I did with Ted Cruz, but I also worked with the Republican senator from Alabama to help Georgia farmers and other farmers to cut through red tape and trade barriers to get their products to market. And I worked with Marco Rubio, whom I disagree with on the issue of reproductive choice. But I said to him, if you believe in life and the sanctity of life, as I do, then maternal health is something we ought to be able to work on together, because the United States of America, among its wealthy peers, has an exceedingly high rate of maternal mortality. It's shameful. And in a state like Georgia, it's extremely high, and black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die, even when they have the income and the insurance. So Marco Rubio and I, who disagree on reproductive choice, work together to pass a bill on trying to tackle this issue of maternal mortality. I want you to think about that, because what it says is that at root, the things sometimes that we think divide us, if we look closer and deeper enough, there might be a principle, a kind of subterranean unity that we haven't thought about that actually connects us so that we can do the work. And so those are the opportunities I'm looking forward to doing. But at the same time, there are systemic issues like the ones you raised. We ought to spend more time together. I think relationships are the basis for doing pretty much anything. And two, there are some systemic issues. Partisan and racial gerrymandering does not help any of us. Because what happens is you send people to Washington who are more and more extreme. The only thing they're worried about is being challenged by somebody more extreme than them. And for the health of our democracy, when I talk about voting rights, I'm talking about gerrymandering as well. These are all systemic issues that if we address them would make it more, the democracy more healthy and more likely for us to get more done.
So this next question is a bit of a doozy, but we've got a 16-year-old in the audience. Would you like to stand? And his question was, and his table agreed on it.
I thought that was John Ossoff. No. John is going to kill me for that. Go ahead.
Well, and I'm sorry to pivot from the humor because it is a very serious question. But the number one cause of death for youth under 18 right now is gun violence. There are many in the room that support the Second Amendment, right? So how do we find a place in Washington where we can agree on some things that help protect our children from, and the rest of us from gun violence? What do you see in the future? And this question came up on several of our cards.
Thank you so much for the question. And the most sacred obligation we have is to make sure our children are safe, to make sure that all of us are safe. But I'm thinking about Uvalde, for example, and I know that there are other ways in which young people are dying from gun violence, but that's a parent's worst nightmare. You know, I dropped my kids off to school this morning. You know, no one ever wants to be confronted with the unimaginable. And I refuse to accept that this is just the way it is and there's nothing we can do about this. I'm glad that after 30 years, and it shouldn't have taken that long, we finally did pass a gun safety law on a bipartisan basis last summer. It didn't include everything that some of us may have wanted, but that bill that we passed last summer will save lives. It will save lives. And what I'm looking forward to doing in this next Congress is connecting with some of the senators and members of Congress who worked together on that last bill to see what else we might be able to get done together. Here is the thing, in some ways, and let me just say that I'm also pro Second Amendment. And so I want us to be clear about that. And I don't know that, I don't personally know that many people who are against the Second Amendment. Maybe, I'm not saying there aren't any, but I'm pro Second Amendment. And so I don't want to frame the issue in that way. Nobody's trying to take, I'm certainly not trying to take everybody's guns. I think in some ways the gun issue is not that much different from the issue around the exorbitant costs of prescription drugs. It's really a democracy issue. That is to say that the people of our country, and I believe the people in our state, are actually closer together on that issue. There are vast differences. I'm not trying to paper over it. But the people, if you do look at the data, the people of our country and our state are closer together on that issue than what we see reflected in the legislation that gets passed. And what I'm saying to you is that the problem is that somebody other than the people too often owns the democracy. So that even on the things we agree on, like most Americans, agree on universal background checks. So ask yourself, why doesn't it get passed? Why doesn't it get passed? There's some undemocratic, small d, undemocratic processes that's leaving us stymied and stuck, even in the places where there's agreement among the population. So one of the most important things we can do, and that's why I fight so hard to get people to show up, to try to encourage young people not to give up. One of the most important things we can do to get progress on that issue and a whole range of other issues is to get our democracy back, meaning the outsized impact of dark money in our politics, all of these things that have drowned out the voices of the people. And that's the spirit and the approach with which I address these issues.
So there were several questions, because you are on the Agricultural Committee, about protecting farmers in Georgia, particularly pecan growers, and tariffs from China. So what's on the agenda with the Farm Bill, and how will that help positively impact Georgia?
Well, it's something that I'm focused on. I know that pecans are very important here in Georgia. In fact, we're the #1 pecan state. We're known as the peanut state, but we're actually not #1 on that.
I think you had an ad in a peanut thing.
Yeah, I was being covered in peanuts in that ad talking about my bipartisan work. But look, the Farm Bill gets renewed every 5 years. I got on the Ag Committee for a reason, and know that I'll keep my eye on the ball protecting Georgia's pecan farmers.
So the other question that you knew was going to pop up is around the debt ceiling. I think that's all I need to say.
I think you and I pay our bills, and we expect the people who send us to Congress to pay the bills. And I think we come here every year because, again, a kind of a misnomer. I think when you say raise the debt ceiling, people think you're talking about some additional costs. We're talking about paying the debts we've already incurred, and they've been incurred, trust me, on both sides. And so you pay your bills, you pay your credit card, you have to pay it. And so we've got to find a way to do this. We cannot afford to play chicken with the full faith and credit of the United States. We can't. The costs would be way too high for all of our businesses, for the most marginalized members of the human family. The devastation that would create is difficult to overstate. And we shouldn't wait until the last minute to get something done on that issue, and I will remain vigilant.
So we also had, and this will be our next to last question, because I know we've got to keep you on a schedule, but we've had several questions about Ukraine and the support of Ukraine, and whether or not you support sending in more weaponry for Ukraine, and how you see that moving forward.
Well, as a man of faith, and as someone who leads the church once led by Martin Luther King Jr., I'm always praying and working for peace. And I do believe, as he pointed out, that means and ends are inextricably connected. So we do have to focus on what does it mean to be focused, to be serious about peace. That said, I also recognize the complexity of the dangerous world that we live in, the reality of geopolitical threats, Russian aggression. For me, this isn't just about Ukraine, it's really about the world order. And Russian aggression has to be checked. And so I support Ukraine. I was deeply inspired sitting in the chamber, listening to the speech from its president. I think he is just one of the amazing figures of our time. And we've got to find a way to continually stand with our allies to check this Russian aggression, because if we don't, the question is what's next? And it's really a war with Putin. I think the balance that we've got to achieve is how do we do this without crossing a certain kind of line where we're at war with Russia. But we've got to stand with our allies, and we've got to lead as we've done. It's an important issue, and we ought to continue to support Ukraine.
So we got a couple of questions about you as a pastor, how that's informed you, and what your personal kind of motto is. What message would you give? Because we do record this and it's available on YouTube. But if you were sending a message out to our young people who want to know about you, what would you tell them?
Young people. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Just in time for my children's book that I just wrote called Put Your Shoes On and Get Ready. And in that children's book that just came out last week, I'm not trying to sell my book, but it is on Amazon. I talk about my upbringing. My dad had the same message to me every morning. I come from a large family, 12 of us. My dad had a fierce work ethic. You didn't sleep late in his house. And every morning, get up, get dressed, put your shoes on. You know, and for him, shoes meant something. It was a sign of readiness, you know. I got a feeling that H.J. Russell was like that. I get that sense from your dad. You get up, you show up, and you get dressed. And he said that to me every morning. And one morning I stumped him. He said, "Get ready." I said, "Get ready for what? It's Saturday." And he said, "I'll tell you later. You just get ready." And it's annoying to hear that when you're 11 years old. But I'm grateful for my dad, God bless his memory, because I have spent my whole life trying to be ready and to show up. Half of life is showing up. In that book, I use the shoe metaphor also. So that's a sense of purpose. But also shoes, I think, for him represents for me at least, a sense of place in the world, finding the shoes that fit your feet. I came to Ebenezer this year, 18 years ago. I came in 2005 to Ebenezer Baptist Church. And the question that I got asked when I first came, especially as a younger man, 35 years old at the time, and I still get asked, what does it feel like, people ask me, to walk in Dr. King's shoes? And my answer for 18 years has remained the same. I don't know, because I've never tried. My job while I serve in the pulpit was never to walk in his shoes, but to stand on his shoulders. I've got 2 little children at home. A lot of times when I'm trying to get them dressed, every now and then they literally put on my shoes. They think it's so funny, and they flop around. My daughter is 6 and my son is 4. She'll put on my shoes. Sometimes she wraps my tie around her head and he'll put on my shoes, and they flop around. They say, "I'm Senator Warnock, I'm Reverend Warnock." It's cute, but they don't get very far. Put on your own shoes. Find the shoes that fit your feet and do the work that you are uniquely called to do. Howard Thurman, a Christian mystic, poet, and Morehouse man, said, "Ask not what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." That's what I would say to young people.
Please join me in thanking our Senator Raphael Warnock.